having core values, not having a specific set, but having them, sticking to them, having a company and a team of people who believe that you're actually sticking to them and that you're rewarding people who engage in them and letting people go who don't, that is highly correlated, extremely well correlated with successful companies.
Welcome to the Magnificent Marketing Podcast, where we interview the top marketing experts in the world to keep you up to date on all the changes and best practices to help you grow your business and stay on the cutting edge. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Rand Fishkin, and Rand is the founder of SparkToro and was previously co-founder of Moz and Inbound.org. He's dedicated his professional life to helping people do better marketing through the Whiteboard Friday video series, business series, blog, and his book, Lost and Founder, a painfully honest guide to the startup world. When Rand's not working, he's most likely to be in the company of a partner of disparage and mostly petty crime author Geraldine DeRuiter. If you feed him great pasta or great whiskey, he'll give you a cheat code to rank #1 on Google. And Rand, I'm going to hold you to that. And today we are going to be talking about thinking about starting a startup. Think again. Rand today will give you his painfully honest advice. Rand, how are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you for having me, David.
Yeah, no problem. And as I mentioned, I read your book from cover to cover. Absolutely loved it. Let me just give a plug to anyone who's not necessarily looking to start up a big startup, but anyone who's looking to start up any sort of company needs to read this. It's written by a guy who went from the very bottom to the very top. And learned his lessons, and he shared those with us in that, shared all of in his book. So highly, highly recommended. And on that note, Rand, can you share why you wrote this book, Lost and Founder?
Yeah, sure. I kept having this experience, which I'm sure you've had as well, where you go out for a beer or for a coffee with a fellow entrepreneur, with someone who's thinking about starting a business, with someone who's already running their own business, even someone who's just an early stage employee, and you have these heart-to-heart conversations about the hard things that don't get talked about in the traditional startup and tech media. And those things include stuff like mental health and layoffs and emotional challenges and people problems and hiring problems and fear. I think there's a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety and discomfort and imposter syndrome. And, American society and culture doesn't really let us reflect those things publicly and look down on us for that. And so I really wanted with this book to have that heart-to-heart conversation as best I could. I realized that it's a little one-sided since I wrote the book, but with as many people as I could, and the book was the way to scale that.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to something I love that you touched on a lot. You just mentioned fear and some of the things that aren't talked about. In all the movies and everything, it's all the hardcore, hard-ass people and doing all that. But the reality is, most of those groups of people come to a crashing burn. Not every single one. There's 1 in a billion that don't. But in general, though, if you're gonna have that, that success. You need to think about it from a different way. And one of those things was something that you talked a lot about was transparency. And I loved it. It's not necessarily the norm. I will say it's becoming the social norm as far as what people are saying that they want. But you're talking about it from within a company. So can you touch on this for us, in the various ways you believe a company should be transparent?
Well, so my advice is not that every company should be transparent. I certainly appreciate it. I love it when I get to see the inner workings, and I think it helps a lot of other entrepreneurs, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you and your company. If transparency is a core value, meaning it's something that you would be unwilling to sacrifice, even if it costs you money and customers and progress in your business, then great. You should absolutely adopt that as a value, and you should be transparent. But, the point I was trying to make in the book is not that you need to have our values, right, or my values, but that you should have your own values. You should have the self-awareness to come to a conclusion about what matters to you and what's important to you, and you should write those things down, and you should make them a part of your company culture, and you should use them to hire people and to promote people and to recognize and reward people, because it turns out having core values, not having a specific set, but having them, sticking to them, having a company and a team of people who believe that you're actually sticking to them and that you're rewarding people who engage in them and letting people go who don't, that is highly correlated, extremely well correlated with successful companies, building successful companies. So that's really my advice, not necessarily the choose one of these particular values.
Well, tell me about, transparency and how it worked for you, because it is a big deal for me personally. I really have open book here with our company, and everybody. I want them to know what's going on at all times, and it makes me feel actually more comfortable to be, to have that, vulnerability, in a way.
Yeah.
I know that you had. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, for me, it's really about not having those painful, sort of secrets that people can discover. I despise having the skeletons in the closet that I have to worry if people will find out about them. And I love the opposite of that, which is just laying it all out there and letting whatever's going to happen. And historically, that's almost always been positive. Not always. Definitely, it creates struggles. There's challenges with it, right? Team members at Moz over the years have been truly frustrated at times with, my transparency publicly, and my board of directors has struggled with that. I know Moz's CEO has struggled a lot with that. The new CEO, Sarah, and yeah, that's been hard. You got to get over it, right?
Gotcha. Awesome. So let's start at the beginning of a decision to start a company. And there's something that it really resonated with me. And I actually personally, like where my roles can grow as, the CEO of our company here. And but you mentioned in your book, and it's a very important topic to touch on, because I think that this is something where a lot of people kind of have a trap door once they get going in a business. And what you said was, if your mission is to do the work I love without letting the business get in the way, that you strongly recommend against pursuing a company that's going to grow and demands that you hire additional people on your team. Can you explain why you gave this advice and what you mean by it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm sure you've had this experience too, David, right? Where for me, right, it was SEO. I love, figuring out the little ins and outs of Google's rankings and figuring out how the things that I do can influence those rankings and rising in the rankings, getting the traffic, attracting those customers. That's just a thrill for me. It's sort of a mystery meets, this creative and technical outlet. And I got to do a lot of that in my consulting days. And then I started hiring people who would do some consulting work. And so now I was doing mostly consulting, but also a little bit of management and training, which was fine. And then we grew to be a software company, and I still love doing, the in-depth product work. But as we got to 20 or 30 people, I found that less than 10, 15% of my day was doing any kind of SEO work. Most of it was, meetings and managing all the things that a business needs to run, and recruiting, raising money, handling operations, the demands from the team. Those things overwhelmed the rest of my days. And so essentially what I was doing was not the work that I loved, but instead enabling the vision that I had for Moz, that I hoped we could become, right? That we could solve these problems around building great SEO software and making SEO a less convoluted, manual, frustrating, impossible to learn practice. And that was a different kind of work, and not a work that I loved nearly as much. But I think I did okay with it. And, for 7 years, Moz grew tremendously to about 150 people. And at that point, I had this episode of depression and stepped down as CEO, but it was sort of a shocking realization for a lot of founders of companies, and people who join in the early stages, that they realize, wait a minute, I'm not doing what I love. I'm not engaging in my passion. I'm enabling this company to exist and to keep growing.
How did you transition to just, a mental exercise of acceptance? How did you, because you were, super skilled at what you do, and then you had to go into other things. You obviously learned that are, had it in, you were forced to do all these other things. How did you deal with that? How did you get there? How did you grow to doing 90% of stuff that is all new and not what you really had a passion around, and then still accomplish what you accomplished?
So I think there's this process of sort of stumbling through a new experience where you fail, you learn from the failure, you try again, and eventually, hopefully, get to a place where you have some competence in that. I think the mental side of that is just, it works because it's like boiling a frog, right? It wasn't that one day my job suddenly changed from 90% doing what I love to 10%. It happened slowly over months and years. And because of that, you slide into almost a comfort zone with it, right? It becomes the new norm. Every day gets a little bit less the work that you love. But I think the problem is when you wake up one day and you say, wait a minute, I'm not doing the thing that made me happy. I'm not following my passion. I thought that's why I started a business. Why am I in this business? And if you can know that in advance and mentally prepare for this idea of what's going to happen as you scale a business, that preparation, just that knowledge and that preparation will make you far less likely to experience that cognitive dissonance when it finally does come to be 90-10 instead of 10-90.
Mm-hmm. But the biggest takeaway is just understand that that's what's going to happen. That's most at some point, unless you end up, having a 2, 3, 4 person, 5 person company, which is nothing to sneeze at now. But if you do plan on scaling and growing, just understand that's part of the deal. Personally, I'm excited about it. For me personally, I love my role of finding the right people and understanding overall what needs to be done without being expert in anything. But being an expert in identifying what needs to get done and finding the right people and building the culture, that's fun for me. But so I'm excited as we grow. But for other people that you might have a specialized skill set that you're just fantastic at, just understand that might change. So and that's the whole point of this podcast is today is if you're thinking about moving forward, understand what lies ahead so you can make the right decision, or make some adjustments before you leap in and find like a complementary partner that can do that. So that moves me on into cool. So as we're moving along here, now you got to like kind of, if you're thinking about starting a business, you had a point here where you called it an unorthodox on choosing your market and your idea. I'd love for you to talk about that, because that might really help people with making decisions here if they're looking to start a company and they have kind of a sparkle of an idea, and then they want to see if it's viable or not. Can you touch on that for us?
Yeah, sure. So, some of the advice that I gave in the book, and just give to folks in general when we're talking about this idea of, I want to create a company, I have this idea, is just to do a few things in advance. And one of those is some validation of the customer pain, right? The pain that people have around this problem that you want to solve. Because I think that many companies, many entrepreneurs who have ideas for companies are trying to solve pain points that are not painful enough or not problematic enough that anyone is really willing to pay for a solution. Or that they're happy enough with their existing solutions that something that's slightly better or even much better just doesn't really call to them and interest them. And because of that, I see way too many companies try to build things that never get off the ground. And then they try and pivot and they try and find something else. But pivoting is really hard, and it's going to take a ton of your time and energy and cash. And so I think that validation process, you can do that early, discover something that's truly painful that people are willing to pay money for. That is quite powerful. And the Lean Startup by Eric Ries does a wonderful job of this. So does Jake Knapp's Sprint, which is both books that I mentioned in that chapter around trying to sort of validate ideas before you go execute on them.
Now, on that note, though, you had an interesting point that really struck out to me. If you're looking to do an idea and you need to sacrifice something in order, like as far as like maybe something didn't rate out as a 10 for you, for you, competition, market size, sales tax. Can you talk about that? Because that was something I hadn't really. I mean, it was bordering on genius on that, like how you see that, as far as the advice that you would give somebody. Can you talk about that? Because some people might think you need to check all these boxes. Oh, they're not all checked. I give up, right? I'm not going to do it. And that's not necessarily when you were saying. When we say thinking about a startup thing, again, we're not saying not to do it. We're just really saying, hey, these are things you really need to consider. And I'm always saying, hey, go for it. You got an idea, you're going to be an entrepreneur. I'm always like, go for it, right? Pave your way. So can you talk about those? What the ones that you might need to sacrifice in order?
Sure. So a few of the things that people, generally need is for a reasonable business, one that can get off the ground and work is, you're solving a problem that customers really have, and that, they're willing to pay to have a solution to. The market is big enough that you can approach it and make a dent. By making even a very small dent, you can make enough to grow the business and sort of pay your bills, scale up if you want. If you're venture backed, totally different story. Then you need incredibly large growing markets. But if you think about other things that you might need in a business, so some of those are I personally have the skills and the passion around this area. I have strengths in this area. I'm a great marketer, or I'm a great engineer, or I'm a great product designer, or I'm a great operations person. And, this particular business demands incredible skills with logistics. If you can match those up with the business, I find that people who have those matching skills and have personal connections to their market. And so like you're serving logistics professionals and you yourself have a background in that and a bunch of people in that world, and that's the arena you're going into, I find that has a much greater chance of success than some of these others. And that's why I mentioned in the book being willing to sacrifice a lot of these other things before you give up that connection to the business.
Understood. So what I'm hearing is, if you have a bunch of venture capitalists and you got to, grow at this clip of return on investment and all that, you do need like a super large market size, correct, right? But if you're looking to, if that's not the case, one of the things that you can't be as long as you really have something valuable that you can bring that's going to solve problems. Your market doesn't need to be gargantuan, and it will suffice at a smaller level. I mean, and then I think you said, the competition in the marketplace, and then your stakes. can you dig into that a little bit to like for the person? Let's not talk venture capitalist type of jobs, but the other ones. So just to kind of basically on the flip side of talking people out of starting a business, let's talk people into starting one. So can you talk about like to give people confidence, like hey, your market size, lack of company, you can still survive and thrive. Is that what I was taking out of that kind of part that you were writing about? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I think the other point that is important in there is that a certain type of person will resonate with a certain type of business in a special way, right? So let's say that you have deep experience in the web marketing world, which you and I do, right? And so we are probably more uniquely suited to build companies that serve web marketers than the average person. And we're probably less well suited, potentially, I don't know if you have a background here, but I don't, to serve the restaurant industry, right? And so if we say, gosh, we want to build a new logistics system for food delivery services to restaurants, and we recognize that there's this trend of urban density. It's going to be a big market. It's growing. More and more people are going out to eat. Upper middle class and wealthy folks in the U.S. are spending more and more of their income in that space. So we identify what looks like an exciting market, but we don't have any experience. We don't have any passion. We don't have any particular skills around it. That's not to say we can't do it. There are plenty of entrepreneurs who can and do. It's merely to say that, in my experience, and I think the stats bear out, that success is often correlated with personal connection to the skills and the audience and the customer base of a given market. And that is the last thing that I would sacrifice in the order of operations of like, what would I worry about if I'm starting a business? That would be the thing I'd always hold on to, because I think it correlates best with an idea that's going to work.
Well stated. Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's. I also loved how you touched on it, and again, a lot of this stuff. When we talk about it, it sounds logical, but I'll just tell you some of the business are the ones staring us in the face, and until somebody brings awareness to it. And this is a big one, and you mentioned that, many companies inherit the traits, good or bad, of the founder. And, and a lot of startups, suffer or fail because founders don't understand themselves and how their companies inherit their traits. They just think it's them. They don't realize how it passes down. And I think we've seen this over the years on, good and bad ways. Certain company cultures, you look at the leader and look at Richard Branson, it seems like all of his companies, I can't speak for all 400 of them or whatever, but in general, the vibe you get from the Virgin brand is kind of the vibe you get from Richard Branson. That's a positive example. But on the flip side, again, people fail because somebody could be crazy intense and that could lead to whatever. I don't know. But can you talk about that and help others avoid this pitfall as well as what they should do to figure out what their weaknesses are?
Yeah. So this idea that companies inherit the strengths and weaknesses of their founders, I think that is well known. But I also want to add this additional point that companies are going to carry their founders' baggage, right? Emotional and mental baggage, meaning that when you have self-awareness, when you gain self-awareness around a particular trait, like, oh gosh, I'm a very impatient person, and I'm often willing to sacrifice, quality or getting something done right for getting it done quickly. Facebook's mantra: move fast and break things, right? And they have certainly shown that they know how to break a lot of things, particularly recently. So I think that the lesson, the takeaway here is to have that self-awareness, to be able to identify your own biases and how that will impact your company, and then to recognize ways that you can potentially solve that. And I spend, a lot of the chapter talking about some a multitude of tactics to be able to address those problems, to have the self-discovery process, to go, oh, okay, I recognize that this is part of me and that's extended to how my company works. And there's also this, advice in there about how to compensate for your weaknesses. And some of those are, hiring people. Some of them are contracting. Some of them are just spending time working on your own personal weaknesses to turn them into, a strength, or at least a level of knowledge. And some of them are structuring your business so that you don't need strength in those areas where you're weak. And I think that's kind of my favorite one, is just saying, hang on, maybe we can build a business that just ends around this whole problem, and we don't need to spend a bunch of energy solving it. But we can say, now that we've identified this, here's how I'm going to structure the company to not need, whatever it is, strength in logistics, or to be great at sales. I personally don't like doing sales, and so I built a company that is self-service, avoiding having a sales team entirely, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, self-awareness is easier said than done, right? For most, 95% of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what advice do you have for people to, how did you become aware of your weaknesses? Were you born that way? Or souls or whatever, and they just kind of, but most of us have to go through our own processes and journeys, and I know you mentioned that, it's inherently known that a lot of companies, but I promise you, anybody who's looking to start a business is not thinking self-aware most of the time, So can you give anybody any pointers in around that to help them through that?
Well, first off, I would say that while self-awareness is a superpower, and it's absolutely a wonderful thing, no one is fully self-aware. We're always on everyone's on a spectrum, and all of us are on a journey. Well, hopefully we are. At least those of us who realize how powerful and important it is are on this journey to better understand ourselves. And that there are tons of ways to go about that. I think it's certainly the case that therapy or professional coaching can be a wonderful tool for a lot of folks. One of the tactics I pointed out in the book was this idea of keeping track of projects that tend to go well, and asking people who you've worked with in the past what they found to be your strengths, and then listing the things that they didn't talk about as probable weaknesses. I think that looking at who you might need to hire, what roles you might need to hire for in the future, and saying, oh, I feel very confident that I could, hire a great software engineer because I know a lot of people in that world. I'm very familiar with that world. I myself went to took computer science in school, and okay, great, that's probably a strength. And then if you feel really nervous about one, like, oh man, I need a finance person. I don't really do my own finances, and finances are always something where I don't understand even why I would need to get sophisticated about that. Like, it seems pretty basic. Why do I need to worry about that? Okay, now you've identified a probable weakness, because anytime you think, oh, that's probably simple, that means that you don't have a great understanding of that field. Because obviously, if you look out there in the world, CFOs are hugely important and critical to companies, and they make incredible salaries, and they're very hard to find. And so there's a tremendous amount of complexity and strategic value in finding great people, but you probably don't have that strength. So that's a good good process for identifying your own strengths and weaknesses, and where you might have vulnerability that's going to extend to the business.
Gotcha. It's almost just like, just pay attention to your feelings, right? If something's making you nervous, maybe that's a weakness, or if something makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's something you need to pay attention to. But overall, just understand that that's going to happen. So just get self-aware, do what you need to do to get there. All right, awesome. So you also had a great point of, as you're considering launching a new company, and you said something, and I'd like for you to dig into this for us. But you mentioned, if possible, build your expertise before you build your network, and build your network before you build your company. Can you touch on that for us?
Yeah. So one of the things that is crucial to a business, to a growing business's success, is the network of the leadership team, right? Because that's how you're going to do recruiting. That's oftentimes how you're going to get press and marketing. That's oftentimes how you're going to do customer validation and discover whether you can get to product market fit and all these kinds of things, right? Raise money, whatever you need to do. And for bootstrapped entrepreneurs, right, this is how you your network will be invaluable for helping you get enough early customers to survive those early years. So my advice is, since you know that you need a network, one of the best ways to build a network is to have expertise that lots of people need and have in demand, right? So if you are particularly good at financial operations, or you're particularly good at software engineering, or you're great at logistics, or you have a passion for design and you're a fantastic UI and UX person for the web or for mobile or for applications or whatever it is, right? That having that skill and having some expertise in that skill, which is then in demand by people, is a great way to build a network, because you can be very helpful and offer advice and freely give that information and that help to other people, which will in turn build a great network, which will in turn enable you to build your business. And that's why that order of operations is my advice, right? Build a skill, build some expertise in that skill, use that to build a network, use that to help build your company.
Yeah, and that makes it a lot easier to launch, right? And be profitable from month one. It's rather than get onto it and then start figuring all that out. So yeah, that seemed like a very now you're thinking about starting on things, go in that order, and then that'll make it a lot less stressful once you're moving along. So as you're moving along, you're obviously going to need to start hiring, right? And this is when I really started to really like you. We only met, like I said, one brief time, but from reading that book, I kind of felt like I got to know you. But one of the first things that I liked you a ton was when you really were talking about competence versus competence. And we'll dig into diversity here in a second. But share your wisdom here. You lived through this. You saw what happened, and then you even dug and even provided for some other companies on how you can actually be much more profitable. But even if you even take profit out of it, it's almost just in my opinion, it is a better way to live. Diversity, you just learn so much from other people. But would love for you, because this is a big one. It's a big mistake people make, hiring competence versus culture fit. So share your experience with us here.
Yeah, sure. So I stole this little chart from a blog post by Brad Feld, and who was one of his investors, still is one of his investors, and talked about basically how most companies will hire people who are competent at the work that they need them to do, and then they will, generally speaking, reward people and promote them and raise their salary and their influence in the company based on the quality of their work. But many companies will also, and I think this is the right thing to do, we talked about this earlier, many companies will also say that, culture is a very important part of their business, right? So that's, living up to your core values and your commitments, treating the people around you with kindness, being a good contributing member of a team, not just a productive individual. Unfortunately, what I see most often is that people who are cultural misfits, that is, they are making the team around them worse, even though they might be doing excellent individual work, or what seems like excellent individual work, that those people who many folks, we've all worked with them, right? They're sort of poison. They, they're toxic to be around, and you sort of dread the meeting that you're going to have with them. but they're revered by management and leadership because, they're so productive, right? They can get so much done, whether it's, it's a phenomenally talented designer and their work is, just beautiful and works so well and customers love it. And, it improves all of our metrics. And so, we need to stick with this person, even though they're just an absolute nightmare to work with and they make people around them feel terrible. And, everyone dreads going into that meeting with them. And they're regularly, hurting people's feelings and, that type of experience, which is so common, is that management will generally promote those people, right? They'll coach them, be like, hey, it would really be really nice if, you were a little nicer to the people that you work with. Well, you did excellent work. Here's your promotion, your bonus, your raise. Awesome. Yeah, that's shitty. That shows that what the company cares about is not culture, but rather everyone being out for themselves. And that's a crap way to build a team. And there's lots of data around the fact that those people, while they seem like they're high performers, are actually dragging down the performance of the rest of the team around them to such a degree that getting rid of them is almost always the right move and will give your company more productivity and higher quality results. And so essentially people are, leadership and management is often incorrectly reversing the, high competence, low culture fit versus low competence, high culture fit. If someone is low competence but high culture fit, it's pretty easy to improve their competence. You can make someone a better designer, developer, operations person, customer service person, especially if they're very much a great culture match. That usually means that they have a lot of opportunity to grow their skills. The reverse is not true. If you are, a highly skilled person who is an absolute asshole, it's really tough to make you not an asshole and keep your skill level high. That almost never happens. And so companies tend to promote those people when they should fire them. And they tend to fire people who have high culture fit and low competence fit rather than spending the time and energy to train them and to upgrade their performance. That's an error in my view.
And I know with Mazam you hired so many people. I know you spoke of an example that you were just mortified and floored by. You found everything out after the fact, and it just crawled at you. Moving forward, as you start SparkToro, you will never make that mistake again. Is that what I'm hearing? Like you just will not consider hiring a competent person who's an a-hole.
Is
that right? Is that advice?
Yeah, I think the challenge is it's very hard to know whether someone fits right. But yes, that's certainly the goal. I think one of the things that I would say is for the future, when I see someone who is dragging down the rest of their team by making people feel, unsafe, unheard, insulted, crappy, I will get rid of that person very fast.
Gotcha.
No matter how skilled they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, what you just mentioned about, high culture and high culture, part of your culture fit most likely is going to be people who are, if you're a company and you're a startup and you're getting going, you must hire people. And one of my kind of qualities that I look for is just people who figure shit out. And are wanting to learn and grow and all that. And most likely, those are the kinds of people who are going to have those inherent traits that they're going to be getting with the smaller company. So you're going to have people most likely who are eager to want to learn and grow. And as a leader, you just need to make sure you don't put any roadblocks up there. You send them to whatever conference they need to go to, whatever you can afford, whatever training you can give them, or on their own. So I'm 100% in agreement with Rand. Is you can grow competence, but you can't grow an asshole. To not be one, it's just not gonna. Yeah, it ain't gonna happen. So, but another point you made on that to me was not shocking that this is the way things should be done, but I was shocked kind of the data about how much better financially diversified companies do versus non-diversified companies. I'd love to hear you speak on that, because that would, I mean, again, it makes inherent sense to me that of course you want different points of view, but I was shocked by how big of a difference it was. So, can you share your experiences on that and your knowledge on some other companies that really put diversity as a top priority?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, so this is diversity of many kinds that we're talking about here. I think that sometimes diversity can be used exclusively to refer to racial background or gender, but I mean it in lots and lots of different ways. I presented a bunch of examples, right? So, things like folks with disabilities, everything from we had a developer who was dyslexic, and he helped point out some UI and UX problems. We had another guy, David Mim, who's pretty well known, who's partially colorblind, I think mostly colorblind, and was super helpful in pointing out stuff in our product that for folks like him was nearly invisible and problematic to consume. I pointed out some examples of where we were using language that could be construed in bad ways and could be turning off portions of our audience that we really wanted to capture. And talked about some areas where office design was unfriendly to certain types of folks who wanted to work there, right? So specifically having some of these privacy rooms for women who were breastfeeding, or people who needed, kind of mental or emotional health, hours off at the office, right, to just go in and chill out and relax and that kind of thing. And all of this stuff can basically, I think, the many tactics and the individual problems that having a diverse team helps solve, those things should come as no surprise from those things that having a diverse leadership team, having a diverse team overall, is correlated with vastly more growth, more success, higher performing stock when we're talking about public companies, better performing startups when we're talking about private ones. I don't think that's particularly surprising. I think maybe what's surprising is the degree to which it's true. You talk about how can we get something that's correlated with 50% higher revenue growth year over year? Well, you could have a founding team that is not all met. Oh my God! Wait, what? That alone produces this correlation? That's crazy. That's insane. And maybe it's just a lot of dudes who, when they get together, have failing companies. But there you go. That's how the stats work. And so, my advice is absolutely to do that early, because I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult if you're a team of 10 white dudes to go say, hey, all right, now it's time for us to get some diversity. That's going to be a real challenge. But if you can do that very early on, your first 1, 2, 3 employees, building your personal network so that it's not just people who look like you and have exactly the same background as you and come from the same place as you and think the same way that you do, that can be extraordinarily helpful.
Cool. And that kind of leads, as you're growing, these people, you're going to need to be moving people up the chain to more C-level or managerial type positions. And obviously starting with a good culture fit, nice diversity, that's all going to make this transition easier for everybody. But I know that, that's a lesson you learn about who to promote as you go to that manager position, because I've also seen that some people who are good at sales aren't necessarily going to be good sales managers. It's a different skill set, and a lot of people don't understand that. So can you share your experience and your advice on, as as people grow, who should be a manager over other people versus kind of stay in their skill set of what they've been performing really well at?
Yeah, well, I think one of the challenges is when companies make management the only path to advancement, right? So if you want more influence in the company, to have more of a say in what products are getting built or how things are getting done, if you want to have bigger salary, if you want to have more stock, you want to have a better title, you need to be a manager, a people manager. And that means that everyone is going to want to and try to be a people manager. And that is kind of a terrible thing for a bunch of reasons. Because so many people are not qualified for that role. Just because you're good at doing your particular job in whatever field you're in does not mean that you will do a good job of managing people who are in that field. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of diminishment by individual contributors of, management can't be that hard. What do? I meet with people once a week and I tell them whether they're doing their job well or not. Anybody can do that, right? Oh my God. You know what? Anyone can code in C++ and do a great job of it if they just spend a little bit of time learning. It's not that hard, right? I think that's what I hear every time I hear management, not that hard. So I think that the other problem is that many management teams will be created from people who are particularly good at their job, right? At their particular skill set. So you were a great engineer, you were a great designer, you're a great marketer, you're a great ops person. Therefore, you'll be a great manager, or we should reward you for having, contributed in these positive ways by taking you out of the role that you're good at and asking you to do something that we have no idea whether you're competent at. And that sounds crazy, but it's how most of the business world works. And my strong advice is end around this problem by creating a path for individual contributors to grow their influence, their salaries, their bonuses, their stock, their ability to contribute to projects without having to become managers. And we did that at Moz, where basically, you could be on the customer service team, you could be, a success help representative person, and if you grew your skills dramatically, you could be making more than and having sort of a higher title and more influence than someone who was, an engineering manager, right? Because that you would proving yourself in that individual contributor track, and even though management was not your path, you were still strongly influential in the company as a whole, and that influence and success was recognized through salary and influence that correlate with management. So.
Gotcha. That was genius that you came up with that, the dual track system, because I know you were dealing with a ton, and then that's amazing advice, and that's the way to work around it, because your only path cannot be management, because I believe you even cited Google found 8 behaviors to be consistently strong across people managers. I won't read them all 8, but number 1 was a good coach. Number 1 was a good coach, and last on the list was the technical skills needed.
Yep.
So that was very eye-opening. And so that just tells you, like, hey, you're going to be doing your company and everyone in your company and just anyone in the world, it's going to be a disservice to every single person by automatically having the career path be to the management level, because you're going to put people in a position that they're not good at, potentially, and then they won't be happy, and then the people underneath them won't be happy. So your advice and what you came up with, having, multiple different, career paths is very, very smart, and amazing advice. Appreciate you sharing that. So as you begin, as we're kind of closing up here, as you begin, this new journey with SparkToro, what are, I know we've talked a little bit about stuff here, and but I'd like for you to summarize it. What are some things that you're going to be doing differently, from the get-go, and what are some of the things you're going to carry over from Moz?
Oh, sure. One of the big ones is I want to make sure to build marketing and a sort of a community of folks who are interested in what we're building before we build a product. And a big part of that is because I want to be able to validate that we're actually building the right thing for the right people, that they truly have this pain, that it's painful enough that they're going to pay for it, right? To try and give this startup a better chance of making it through those early years, which are pretty tough. Another big one is this go around, I'm going to hire much fewer people, but probably much more experienced folks who've been there and done that before, and I expect that I'm going to pay a lot more for them. So spending the cash that we have and that we earn on very senior folks. Obviously, in the early stages, that's mostly individual contributors, not managers. But bringing those kinds of folks aboard rather than, hiring lots of more junior folks. And that I think both models can work, but that one works better for me. And I do much better with a smaller team. Another thing is the structure of the company. I'm not planning to raise any venture capital or institutional money, which means, the business can be successful in a lot of different ways. That's not just, get to $100 million in revenue and 30% year-over-year growth and go public, or, sell for hundreds of millions of dollars. But rather, hey, if this is a $5 or a $10 million a year business that has 20 or 30% margins, that is a very successful business, very successful small business. And I want to leave that path open, which is why I'm doing sort of an odd and very unique path for fundraising this time. So yeah, lots and lots of lessons carried over. But hopefully I'm a little better at this the second time around.
Oh gosh, talk about the most modest speaker. All right, Rand, Now, before I was going to end with a quote from Rand in his book, but before I do that, I do want to let everybody know, we touched on a lot of big picture stuff today, a lot of lessons learned that Rand, some awesome advice from his, real life experiences through a very intense journey that he shared, that everyone should, heed his advice. Some of the things we didn't touch on today that I let everybody know that's in the book, and again, I'm really pushing people to read it because it's going to be really helpful, is, he talks about, if you're deciding to on that, it touched on, people who are transitioning from a service to a product. He went deep on everything to think through when you're looking to raise money, the various ways you could go about that. Even touched on, growth hacking and some of the pitfalls there, is trying to get lots of business for like steep discounts or raising lots of, and then there's some, really things you need to consider there. Again, it could be a good idea, but it could also be a very bad idea. And he talks about, his core, marketing plan, how, what he does on an ongoing basis, or what he did at Moz to do that set. So, and, he went into MVP versus EVP, meaning minimum viable product, when to roll that out, when to roll out an exceptional viable product. So there's so much I wanted to talk to with him about today. We didn't get around to everything, but I wanted to let everybody know that, there's a lot of amazing stuff in the book. But I do want to end on this quote from Rand because it was awesome. What he says is, what's helped Moz and me again and again to find greater hope and a way forward is a process that doesn't attempt to reach a specific goal or have a finite endpoint. It's an ongoing journey and investment with steps repeated over and over again, all in the direction of self-awareness. I think this as a personal person who's going, on this same journey, you have to have that mindset. You must have that mindset, or you are going to go bonkers and probably be an unhappy person, because there's going to be tough times, but if you have that mindset, you will eventually achieve. Rand, thank you so much for your time today. I just extremely enjoyed it, and I know others did too.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm thrilled to join you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the latest podcast. Feel free to go to magnificent.com whiteboard.com/blog to see the show notes for this interview, as well as those from many other of the world's top marketing experts. Have a great day.